really indicative of that. And I put 2021, I put change as a question mark. And I think the big question around change is, what do we want to see? And what do you want to see? And what does that change look like? What does that change look like? And how are we all going to impact that change? How are we going to work on that together? So just a reminder of what the scorecard measures. The scorecard measures the 6 pillars. So these came out of a book called Rainforest Strategies, or the rate. What's the name of the book? Someone help me out. Erin, the real Erin. Type in. The weighting, though, of the pillars were assigned at the very first summit, so back in 2016. So these are the ingredients to building the innovation ecosystem. These are the areas that we measure the progress and measure the work and measure how we feel about what's happening in our community. So culture is the foundation of the ecosystem. It's our shared values and the actions of our member, which ultimately determine the success of the new initiatives. Many people are familiar with our social contract. It's the set of values that we internalize and then externalize in practice and moving through the ecosystem. It's the values of trust, of giving free help, of listening, of calling out elephants in the room, of being a role model and paying it forward. So there's those values of the social contract. We talk about leadership, and we've been talking about leadership generally through the month of November. So please also join us next week as we continue that conversation. We talk about those both big L and little L leaders, and the big L leaders being those positions or those titles, and sometimes they're positions that are given, sometimes they're positions assumed. And then we have our little L leaders, which is all of us, and the work that we do daily in our organizations, in our companies, in our lives. And you can be both little L and big L at the same time, and across different spectrums or in different areas of practice. So resources, so those are we talk about the foundational elements, and they can be a little bit more tangible or intangible. So some of those like tangible resources could actually be like having office space available for you, having actually having a talent pool to pull from, and some of those, well, intangible can be also human talent, but so what's that knowledge? So policy and infrastructure, so that is what we exist within. So that is, we often talk about that being, the ability to access capital. That also falls under resources. There's lots of gray areas here. But what are the things and kind of those boundaries that we work within, and how do we push against those boundaries? Engaged activities. So that is Innovation Week. I know Calgary's having theirs, Edmonton had theirs. It's also all the meetups that happen. It is the coffee dates that happen, or the Zoom meetings. So it is all of those things that build on and have conversations around a lot of the other pillars. And then we have role models. So these are the people who are in our ecosystem, who we look up to, who have the characteristics and the values that we want to emulate. And again, they can be really uniquely personal. So it can just be one person who you are working with, maybe specifically like in your organization, in your company, or they can be broader and well known to the whole community. And again, we need that mix of both those personal and those general. So let's dig into it. So this is the Calgary Scorecard comparison year over year. So this is the percentage that each pillar got out of 100. So what you can see is that overall, every single pillar in Calgary grew year over year. So there were gains year over year. In Calgary, we had better gains in resources and in leadership, and we actually had a pretty big jump in culture, and culture is now getting very close to that goal score of 80%. That's really, really fantastic news. In Edmonton, we saw the same thing, but with really big jumps in role models and leaders. And so I know that there were comments as part of the scorecard this year. And so in part of the final reporting that will go out to the community through December, we'll be able to digest and perhaps see some comments on what's reflected there. And you may be able to reflect in your own city as you're sitting why you think those jumps are there. So again, just a reminder, the scorecard is an impression. It is how we each uniquely feel about the ecosystem. And then we dump all that data together, create averages, and give that impression back to the community. So just know that your score may have been higher or lower. We're presenting the averages. All right. The time has come. We're going to present a score. So as a quick reminder, the goal score for rainforest is to get to 800 out of 1,000, and to get to that sort of 80% across all pillars. And I don't know what happens when we get to 800. I don't know what kind of party happens, but I think it's going to be pretty big. I haven't confirmed, but that is the goal, and that's that 80%. That means that we should be, I would say we'd be really well known to the general public. I would say that we are going to be thought of as leaders across our cities, as desirable places to come work. So that is my hope. So drum roll, if you want to unmute yourself and actually do a drum roll, you totally can. Or you can just do a drum roll on your own. Yeah. Thank you to whoever did that. I'm not looking at anyone's pictures. So boom, here's our scores. So Calgary got 115 responses to the scorecard survey this year. Edmonton had 155, and the scores you can see have gone up in both cities. And I would say, considering we have been online and for the most part not able to do a lot of that work that we do as a community, which is meeting and networking and building and sharing, that we have truly thrived through this time and grown, and that people are optimistic and have continued to do the really, really fantastic work of growing our innovation ecosystems in both cities. So I was actually shocked at this number. I'll be perfectly honest. I didn't expect the gains that it got. And I'm just so overwhelmed and happy. And I think it is a reflection on the work and the foundation that has been laid over the past 4 years. And I'm so proud of everyone for contributing to that who's here today. I can't say that enough. And I see people are blinking things in the chat. I'm sorry, I'm not watching it. So if Aaron or Jason or Bridget can just watch the chat if there's anything I need to respond to. So we're going to dig into the scorecard a little deeper. We're going to just take a really quick high level overview on a few metrics. And then again, like I said, we'll put out a more fulsome report through December that digs into some of those metrics a little bit further and gives more context to some of those scores. So we're just going to hit on a couple of them right now, just so we can have some kind of conversation and questions. So we're going to dig into Calgary first. So the question that received the highest score on average was that the community encourages people with ambitious, creative, and innovative mindsets. And it got an 8.3. So you can see a really, really good trend. And that had a growth year over year, that question. The question that received the lowest score is actually the same question as last year, which is, there are mechanisms to inform industries about skill needed and in-demand people to help organizations through their tech transition. So while this score improved year over year, it is still seen generally as the weakest point in the Calgary ecosystem. So here's our demographic results. So we did a demographic capture. We did a small one last year, and we did a bigger one this year. And I think the biggest takeaway is, one, we still need more women to be answering the scorecard survey. But if you look at the score jump between those who identified as female and male year over year, something good is happening in our ecosystem. Women have traditionally in both cities scored lower, always scored lower than men. And to me, this is one of those bright shining moments in the scorecard this year, is something's happening for women. And so Shelley, I don't know if anyone from the 51 is on the call. I know that there's good work being done through BDC and Alberta Women Entrepreneurs. And this is so encouraging to me. So just there's a quick note there on that. Unfortunately, what we see is those who didn't identify as white or European in our capture are still scoring the ecosystem lower. So those who would identify as Black, Indigenous, or person of color, so Southeast Asian, African, Caribbean. So we still see a gap, though close. There is work to be done there in making sure those participants in our ecosystem are feeling as optimistic. So Edmonton, similarly, so a different pillar question, and just a quick note, the scorecards are not identical in both cities, but for the most part ask the same questions. But I found it really interesting that the highest question almost got to the same thing, that people, so leaders champion innovation, encourage ideas from all people. So really good to see that people are feeling optimistic in this area. And their lowest score was resources, so believing that it's easy for innovators to access funding for their ventures. And I would say probably if we were to dig into the Calgary scorecard results, it would similarly score lower in Calgary as well. So just a note on that. So the demographic results for Edmonton. So we saw the same trend in Edmonton as in Calgary. And if anything, actually, if you look, the average score of those who identified as male went down, and the women made, or those who identified as women made a gain in Edmonton as well. So again, really, really encouraging to see that is a really, really great trend. No, not great that the males are trending down, but a great trend that the women are going up. So Edmonton captured their demographics a little bit different. So we had a big conversation on how we were going to present this today. So people who essentially identified as white, European, cisgendered, heteronormative, versus those who were not white or identified as LGBTQ2A+ or other commonly marginalized groups, excluding women. So we see those populations, again, scoring the ecosystem lower. And so again, recognizing that there is work to be done in that area to making sure those participants in the ecosystem feel equally as optimistic. So a reminder, the comprehensive city-specific reports, because other things were captured, so age, stage in the ecosystem, area of work, and the comment summaries will be published towards the end of 2020. So there were other capture and data points that we got. We just wanted to kind of highlight a few that gave both highs and lows in the ecosystem. So now it is question time. So I'm going to, I have one more slide. So here's what I'm gonna do. I have one more slide, and I'm gonna present it, and then I'm gonna stop screen sharing, and then we'll get to questions. So these are the 5 words that we've been really focused on in the community this year. And so just a reminder that the Rainforest is a grassroots community. We are all of these things, these 5 words, and we're better together. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for their continued support of building the innovation ecosystem and the tech sector as we've moved online. I truly feel, that the commitment to building a brighter future is alive and well. So thank you, and I think everyone should give themselves like a pat on the back or a party symbol in the reactions. This is great stuff. So I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna stop sharing, And this is the question. Yay, Shelly, the 51 is here. Great. Awesome. So I just want to give a quick shout out to a few people who are here in the room today. So Brad and Jim are here. So Brad and Jim are two of the original Rainforest founders. It was them reading the book and putting their big heads together and then pulling a whole bunch of people. So Jim Gibson, Brad Zemwalt, wave. For me, they're on my front page. They are here today. So a huge, huge thank you to them. And I see lots of other people in the room who are doing, so from like service providers, Mackenzie, who is Pat's community manager, she's hanging out with us today. Al, who runs the podcast, is here today. And I also want to give a big shout out to the Edmonton team, because Edmonton has a steering committee built by volunteers. So I see Erin is here, Lan is here, Joel, I hope that you're here. Gail, I hope that you're here. I feel like Gail couldn't make it today. Oh, I see Gail. She's on my last page. I'm trying to scroll through and see who. Joel's here? Is he? Perfect. So, oh yeah, there's Joel. He's on my first page. So a huge thanks again to Edmonton, and a big shout out to Jason, who's our student from Bow Valley College, who has been helping to compile and analyze our data for us this year. A big thank you to all of those people. So yeah, now we're gonna open it up to questions. So if you have a question, please either use like the raise hand function, or just type your name in the chat and I can call on you.
Courtney, I'll just jump in here and say thank you to you for all the work you've done on the scorecard assessment this year and previous years. And maybe also just a quick mention on all the work you've done on diversity and inclusion and creating a starting point for conversations around D&I and equity in our community. And just so everybody knows, we did have a D&I expert help formulate and adjust the questions around demographics this year. So they may have looked different to you than previous years, and they may have been asking some what might seem to some as personal type information, but they came from a place of wanting to collect data in that in that area. So thanks for all your work on D&I and starting that conversation for us.
You're welcome. All right, so TJ, I see that you have your hand raised, so I'm going to go to you, and then Patrick, I'm going to loop back and answer your question.
Yeah, hey guys. I was actually just wondering, Courtney, what happened to the ecosystem map that I know was under works maybe about a year ago? I'm wondering if that actually ended up coming to fruition.
So the ecosystem map has not come to fruition through ups and downs and also some pivots that are happening. So there's some other groups that are looking at it in Edmonton and had some traction as well. So from a Calgary perspective, it's been tabled for now. It hasn't collected too much just yet. So it's also possible to pivot and reopen it, and just looking at what that next best step for that is, so that we're making sure we're not offering competing products out into the ecosystem at this time. So it's the maybe still. So Patrick, I'm just gonna quickly pull up the information. So yeah, last year, for those who remember from last year, when we looked at the age distribution, we had a really small number of people under the age of 25 who answered. I will say again, this year, we had a really small number. We had 3 people who answered. So not super awesome. And this year we captured, in Calgary, we captured that date range by traditional generation. So I would just like to say, Gen X, you are well represented. Millennials next, and then those boomers following that. So, but there is decent age representation. Yeah, there is decent age representation answering, except for again in that young generation. So, Ruth Ann Weeks, Gen X. Sorry, what's the question there? Like what age groups we used for that? Like what years we used for that?
No, you just missed them when you were speaking.
Oh, I thought I said that Gen X was the most represented.
I thought it was millennials.
No, it was X, then millennials, then boomers.
Okay, sorry about that.
All good. Brent, you have a question. Brent Zuber.
Thanks, Courtney. Age, I think, is an important factor, but I'm curious in the future if you'd also, I guess when people sign the social contract, you know how long they've been part of it, but I'm curious whether or not they become more critical over time, right? You know, they set the bar a little higher, and I'm wondering in the future scorecards if you'd kind of take that part of it into it, or if you've thought of that.
Yeah, so actually, so one of the questions is, how long have you been in the ecosystem? And so last year, I know when we reported on it, we reported that the longer you had been in the ecosystem, the lower that your scorecard got. So we haven't, I don't know, Jason, did you run that one yet? Jason, can you answer that off the top of your head? If not, it will be coming in the report. So we will report on a lot of that when we do the more fulsome report. So yeah. Pete, what's your question?
Maybe a bit of a question for Brad and Jim, and kind of the resourcing side of it, and the relationship that for resourcing and the conversations that we're having with various ministries of the government who have a hand in setting the policies and direction, and, you know, investment structures and those sorts of things, like the Lost Alberta Investor Tax Credit, et cetera. How does this, obviously we can leverage some of this, but how does that message go to those people effectively?
So I don't know if there's one answer to that question, Pete. And Brad and Jim, feel free to jump in. I think it's much of what we do right now. It's having conversations. We can write our MLAs. You can, if you were a company or if you were part of something that benefited from those, getting your story out to talk about the benefits of that. If you were looking to explore that and now you don't have that option, telling that part of the story. So it's really about, you know, putting your voice to it, because if just one organization does it, it's not effective, right? We need a collective to do it, and that's why we talk about being a movement.
It's Brad. I keep looking for Jim to reach down for his mute button, but I see he's not moving his hand down there. I guess the response that I would give Pete, to kind of give context for this and why I think the work on the rainforest is still central to what we have to do in this province. And that is, as we measure it, the number of tech jobs and the number of tech companies that we have in Alberta, and I love all of them. I'm very proud, investor in several of them, have done very well by the tech sector in Alberta. The fact is, it's still only 1/3 of the size it should be compared to other jurisdictions in Canada. When we adjust for population, Toronto, Waterloo, Montreal, Ottawa, Vancouver, we're only at 1/3 of our potential. And so we're going to go through an era where more resources are going to come into the sector. More resources in Jim's area in talent development, more resources in investment capital, more resources in all the areas that we need them, as described by the pillars. But if we pour those more resources in and we have a toxic, backstabbing, non-trusting culture, it's going to be an enormous waste. And so to keep this culture piece developing, to keep looking back and forth, Calgary and Edmonton, across sectors, across support organizations, throughout the Calgary Innovation Coalition, and keep demanding that trust grows and that we operate in a way, as those more resources come in, then we can get better results for our friends and neighbors and fellow citizens. We can move Alberta up from realizing 1/3 of its potential for tech jobs and tech companies to fully reaching its potential with those other areas. And so we just have to keep the environment right, because we're going to be going into a phase where we're going to load more resources into it. So Pete, I think that's my kind of context answer for the question, but I'd love to hear Jim's response personally.
Well, here, by the way.
Yeah, and Brad, you're always on message and focused, which is awesome. I'll sum it up by saying, and Courtney knows what, and Mackenzie and Pete know this, that culture's a bucket with holes in it. And the idea that culture just happens and then we can be said and done, it just doesn't make sense. And so as we bring in and accelerate, it's actually more important that culture keeps up, because culture of trust is actually an exponential function, not a linear one. And so we have to continually remind ourselves to continually fill that bucket. And the work that we do on the ground that we continue to do is essential. I see it everywhere I go across the province, where people reference the culture of trust. Some people forget that we were one of the earliest ones to put up our hand and say, I think this is where you have to start. But they're certainly seeing the impact of it now. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Jim, Brad, and for Pete for the question. So I'm behind on the chat, so I'm gonna try to quickly get through some questions that got answered. So Alicia asked, are there specific strategies to build up the engagement score in 2021 as we continue to work with COVID? And I would say share. Get on social media, go to events, tell people where you're at. So that, I know that's not a super specific strategy, but that is one. And with report, we will loop back to that as well. Catherine, you asked, since diversity and inclusion was a focus and that you presented on the session, persons with disabilities, there wasn't an identifier in the survey. So Catherine, I'm gonna guess that you answered the Edmonton survey. Calgary's did have a capture for that, and Edmonton's didn't. And I don't have the results like right away, but I can get you that. There were, I would say, from a disability perspective, and we looked at a lot of things. So we looked at neurodiversity, physical disabilities, mental disabilities. I would say that 80% of respondents identified as having no. There was probably 10 to 12%, I want to say, who said prefer not to say. And then the other remaining kind of was spread out amongst a few of those things. Okay, so I'm just making sure questions. Can we make a video of Brad's comments? Yeah, so just a reminder, we will post this onto YouTube, this whole presentation. Okay, so Adrian Mitchell, I see that you have your hand raised. Do you have a question?
No, I think I heard it. I want to make sure I didn't hear it wrong. I think I heard you want to increase student engagement. Is that right? Like at the universities?
We have talked about having students be more engaged in the ecosystem. So we have that continuity, right, from talent and ingenuity into the ecosystem. Yes.
So there are at least two of us here, myself included, who are current U of C Masters of Data Science students. So I mean, you could, if you want to reach out to me or Tomasz, Tomasz is on here somewhere. Later, we'll be happy to try and connect you with some of our professors or some of our groups and chats there.
That'd be awesome. If you could just type your name and your email into the chat, and then we'll capture that. Sure. So that we know that we can get a hold of you. Sure. So I see some side chatter going on. So if you see somebody who's talking about something, feel free to private message, exchange contact information, carry the conversation forward. Donna wants to know, does Rainforest work together with other organizations like UC, CDL, and to create greater awareness? Yeah, so right now I would say our two biggest partners that we're working with are Startup Calgary and Platform Calgary. That being said, we're also working with other startup organizations. So we're working with Good Lawyer, we're working with Nicer, we're working with 321 Growth Academy. The Rainforest in Calgary is part of a group called the Calgary Innovation Coalition. So I think there's up to 40 members right now. Craig, how many do we have? Do you remember off the top of your head? 40?
45.
45. Good work, Colton. Things I should know. So we are a group of organizations who work together, who exchange entrepreneurial stories, help redirect entrepreneurs. And that's governed by a group of fellows who helps steer the way the innovation ecosystem is or the Calgary Innovation Coalition is working, and some of the objectives, and we get funding through Alberta Innovates, and then where we put that funding to support entrepreneurs. So we are always connected to everybody, and Rainforest has flexed and fluxed throughout the years on the different partners that we work with, depending on kind of what stage of entrepreneurs are coming into the ecosystem. So right now we're seeing a lot of really early adopters coming in, people who are new to Canada, people who are new to the innovation ecosystem. And so we're trying to look at those as much as the people who have been around for a very, very long time. CDL, because it's a little bit later stage, tends to get redirected from some of the other organizations who we are first directing to. So it's kind of this little bit of a roadmap. So I hope that answers that question. Perfect. Heiko, you have a question.
It's actually more of a comment. So yesterday I was on the platform Passport, which was in Houston. And so there's a bunch of VCs and innovation people down there. And I asked them how their ecosystem was going and how they built it. And it was interesting because one of the things they said was 5 years ago, they invested heavily in innovation and they built a building to centralize innovation and they put it close to downtown and so that it could be there. And so they said a bunch of great stuff that, you know, and so basically 5 years later, so since that building's been built and they made it the focal point and you kind of graduate from the main floor up the floors, right? As you become a bigger and bigger. And now, yeah, they've seen their valuations go up. I mean, each one of those VCs was talking about doing 50 to 100 deals a year, right? So yeah, there's a lot more movement. So, you know, so that was good to hear because I mean, I think we're in the right track.
That's super awesome. I had to go through downtown. I was going over to Inglewood, so I drove past Platform, the innovation center that's being built along 9th. I can't believe how far along it is. It's insane. And I mean, like when you go kind of down there, we're used to going down there day by day, and then I hadn't been there in months, and I was like, oh my goodness, it felt like so incredibly tangible. It was like it gave me goosebumps. So that's awesome. Super excited. Great comment, Heiko. I can't even believe it's 12:43 already. Oh my goodness. All right. What else? Any other questions? Is there anyone else who has questions? Ruth Ann, I saw you like giving I wasn't sure if that was like a high five or like raising your hand.
No, that was just giving Brad kudos for bringing up psychological safety and trust.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Do
Greg
we have it?
Raised up his hand. Go ahead.
So just to go with what Heiko said, so for those of you that are coming to Ian's session tomorrow, one of the questions I'm going to ask is around what's called startup density. He talks a lot about the impact of startup density, which I think is going to be one of the benefits of platform when it finally gets opened.
Sorry, what session is that?
Sorry?
What session is that?
So tomorrow, Ian Hathaway is doing a 60-minute session around the 5 things the province can do to better support high growth or high potential entrepreneurship.
Can you pop that in the comments?
Yeah, here.
Thanks.
The last time I checked, I think we have 275 registrations down here, and Edmonton's got 260. So, and it's not targeted towards entrepreneurs; it's towards ecosystem builders. So I'm pretty pleased with the results that we've gotten out of the event.
Yeah.
And if can I just jump on Craig's excellent comment on startup density? I don't know if everyone has seen this model that the A100 and my team has helped create, which talks about what would it look like if Alberta got to parity with other jurisdictions for the number of companies. And that startup density is a very important area. We distributed the number of companies by size over 5 segments, from 1 to 4 person startups to 5 to 4 person seed companies to 50 to 49 person scaling companies to 100 to 500 person growth companies, and then 500 plus enterprise companies. In Calgary, just to give an example, in Calgary, in the largest companies, we're only at 41% of where we should be. We have some great anchor tenants, Benevity, Replicon, Smart, up in that big size, ShareWorks, of course, but we're only at 41% in the biggest. In the growth category, we're only at 58%. That's pretty good. In the 50 to 99 category, we're at 27%. In the 5 to 50 person companies, we're at 48%. But it's in this startup density area, and Pete, to take it back to culture. In the startup area, 1 to 4, we're only at 12% of where we'd like to be as a city. It would say right now, in an ideal situation, to match what the Toronto-Waterloo corridor has, adjusted down for our population base, ideally in Calgary, we'd have 2,300 1 to 4 person startups. Calgary, as we track it right now, we have some 270 or 280. So when we think about startup density, we're only at 10, 12% of where we'd like to be. That's a massive culture change that has to happen across our city, involving everybody, every corner of the city has to take on this fact that if we're going to really catch up, we have to deliver on that startup density. There has to be more engagement, more conversation, and really just a lot more belief that we're a city that can spin up startup ideas, bring talent to those startup ideas, and push them along. If that early part of our funnel, if that startup density stays only at 10% of where it should be according to other jurisdictions around the world, it's just going to be way too hard to get to our goals. And so that's the area of the 5 sizes of companies that we're furthest behind in Calgary and Edmonton, is really having the culture and the self-confidence and the belief that we can build great companies here and just get started at that formation stage around 1 to 4. So great comment on the density, Craig, and that's an area that we have to really catch up year by year.
And that's the most important, right? Because you can't get to a 100-person company without starting with a 1 to 4 person company.
Sure.
Well, I believe that for sure, Heiko, and you can't even start a 1 to 4 unless you think, as Jim's pointed out to us before, that if you think you live in a city that you can trust, that you don't have all the answers in your startup, but you can fall into this safety net of a rainforest-like community, and you'll meet people along the way that'll provide answers to you. When we're doing that, that's the most important signal that we'll get when we start really gaining in those 1 to 4s for sure.
So I'm going to put a quick plug in, because at 3 o'clock today, the 12 participants of the Libby Fund are pitching their ideas and asking for help from the community. So join us at 3 o'clock today. If you're not registered, it's on Eventbrite. So I'm just trying to be really mindful of the time. Patrick, I think you had your hand raised first. So question?
Yeah, this was just like a question that's been kind of nagging me, and I kind of alluded to it a couple times before, but do we have any data collecting on who answered the survey that was an entrepreneur and was not an entrepreneur? Because I think we focus a lot on entrepreneurs, and I love you guys, but I think it's also important to get the opinions of people in the rest of the city who don't necessarily want to start a business, but at least know that they have a future here to work for tech and innovation, right?
Yeah. So there is a question that says, like, are you an entrepreneur or a service provider? Kind of like, where are you? So we will dig into those results. Again, floating the scorecard out to the community is sort of, the community needs to say, hey, you need to tell us how you're feeling.
So I'm glad to hear that, because I'm looking forward to seeing kind of how those different groups actually respond to the attitudes as well.
For sure.
Thanks.
TJ?
Yeah, so I just had a comment based off of Brad's kind of comments about saturation, startup saturation. I guess what I've seen in Rainforest and Platform and the like is a really heavy emphasis on tech, and which is amazing and awesome, but there's also, it tends to exclude a little bit, like a large chunk of entrepreneurs in the city who are doing things like stuff you'd see at Market Collective. So they're making candles and soaps and fashion and home accessories and decor and whatever, jewelry. A lot of these makers are really, I have yet to see activated in the ecosystem. A lot of them are just sort of independent artisans. They show up at a maker fair or something like that, and they put out their booth, but they're really, as an entrepreneur, they're quite isolated. And many of them, I've talked with a lot of them, and they do have intentions to grow their brand. Some of them don't, and they're perfectly content being a really small kind of enterprise, but a lot of them do kind of see themselves expanding. And so that is something that I'm hoping to try to engage and pull in some of these individuals, and just get them involved in what's going on a little bit more, if that's something that we're looking for. I guess I'm not really sure to what extent, because everything does seem so digitally focused. It's kind of tough, and I can see it being intimidating for these kind of people, or maybe they feel like it's not the niche for them. So
yeah, I can respond to that. So absolutely, this here is, we're focusing on tech-enabled and innovation businesses. And the reason for that is their potential to scale and create jobs is greater than that of an artisan. And I can say that having been an artisan, right? And that, but also seeing the flip side of tech and what a tech-enabled business can grow. So yes, those entrepreneurs need supports. Are the Startup Calgary's the platforms and the places, the things to do it? Probably not the best area. Are there learnings from those that we can transfer into those other small home-based, maker-based businesses? Yes, TJ, you and I can probably have that conversation, and thinking about how do we build those other kinds of businesses, and what kind of community needs to build those people up and give them the supports they need. But specifically, I'm going to say that the Rainforest and the Startup Calgary's, right, and the Thin Air Labs, and the platforms of the world are focused on those innovation because of their ability to scale, grow, raise capital, get investment, and turn around and contribute to the economy on a larger scale than what a home-based maker business can. So,
Courtney, can I jump in here? Because
yeah, and I think, and so I just saw Mark's note in the comment, right? Business Link can help out entrepreneurs. There are some ecosystem players who are helping out here, but who can support those other entrepreneurs as well. Go ahead, Craig.
So, I mean, I'm learning a ton through this, because if I hadn't read this book, I would have done exactly that, just invest in high-tech industries. It turns out a lot of the research says the creatives are actually the largest part that need to find a way to be embedded in what we're doing. And it's the startup communities that do that end up outperforming those that just invest in the tech-oriented startups, because those that work in tech, especially the younger ones, they care about the creative part of that industry. And that's how they make decisions about where they're going to live, where they're going to do startups, all kinds of stuff. I'll try and find the one piece in here that's specific to this, but I was super, super intrigued about the impact that actually has, because to me, it was totally counterintuitive.
Cool. OG Aaron, you have a question?
I was just going to ask Brad if the information of the Butterfly Project or the stats that he was talking about are listed anywhere online. There's some resources we can look at.
I thought we had them on the blog, and I can't find them. So I probably have them sitting in a folder somewhere. But Brad, I'll work with Sonia to get those up. How does that sound?
Yeah, and I think that, between you and Bridget, just to make sure that the latest version of the models and the collection of companies by size, Calgary and Edmonton, is always available to the Rainforest community is essential. There's really this shift that as we strap in and kind of buckle up for this 10-year journey, we have to be driven by data, not opinion. And I really want those two pieces of work to contain all the numbers so that we can drive ahead by the numbers, not just by flavor of the days and opinions. We have to build companies, and those companies have to provide jobs. And so we have to measure that as we move forward.
Awesome.
Hats off again, Craig, because I think the point here as well is that innovation and technology goes beyond software bits. It goes into all of the components and the plastics and the chemistries and the chemicals and the molecular shifts in the way things are built and reproduced and potentially manufactured. So I think this is a broader range conversation about supporting those smaller communities and all of those little inventions that are out there. So I thank you
I feel
for
like maybe it needs to be a topic for like January or February, right? Like how does tech support all this other stuff?
Well, I found the page in the book. So anybody gets the book when they show up tomorrow, page 40 talks about this whole process.
Awesome. All right, everyone.
I think, Courtney,
Is that a
too,
real
like,
physical meeting?
I think that this all kind of comes back to, in the conversations I keep having with everybody in the community, are all about telling our stories outside of the community. And to build that top of funnel 1 to 4, people need to be made aware that innovation is accessible. And everyone in this room is here, you know, as proof of that. But how can we share that beyond this bubble, which this is the largest I've ever seen this bubble. And I just wanted to send that message while we had that larger audience, to invite those into the bubble so they can just be made of that awareness. And like Brad said, know there is this safety net of the rainforest for them.
For sure. And I see lots of really good comments going on in the chat. So I just want to be mindful of everyone's time because we have 4 minutes left today. And I'm going to make an announcement. I'm going to steal the thunder, but then I'll leave the room open if anyone needs to stay and chat about other things. So I am leaving Rainforest at the, like, especially as that really forward facing end of December. So I'm going to be helping Bridget, I think, through transition through early 2021. But don't put things in the comment, Bridget. Jeez. So yeah, I posted a blog about it today. Jim, I'm never really leaving, right? As Mackenzie sits and watches. I know, I'm never really leaving. No, I'm not, because what I really want to do is take what's been here in the last 2 years and talk about that bigger and fuller. So I'm running for City Council in Calgary. For those that are curious, and I want to have that big conversation with the city and talk about what it means to be entrepreneurial and innovative and to learn to fail and be okay with that. And so I just want to say, like, the most huge and heartfelt thanks. Brent, who's going to start the meetings with humor? You, Brent, you. I have never been, this has been the most wonderful community. And we are talking about that, how Rainforest has truly embraced people. And I came right from that arts background and that small business background in retail, and have been totally welcomed by this community. I have learned so much from all of you. Jim and Brad, I could not ask for better people to work under. I really couldn't. And I know Ken's is here, and Bridget and Aaron, and the rest, and Joel and Lan and Gail. It has just been so wonderful to work with all of you. So I'm going to just have my little tears today, and then I'm going to come back next week and be not like this at all.
Good luck with that.
So thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this such a wonderful home to be part of every single week.
Thank you, Courtney. You're awesome.
Good job, Courtney.
Real claps, unmute, real claps. Enough of this quiet.
Courtney. I'll mute myself as I sniffle. So thank you. I get that the scorecard opens up a huge can of worms and conversation. So I am going to leave the room open for those who do need to talk and have conversations and just take those few last minutes to connect with each other. So thank you. Thank you so much for being part of that, for answering the scorecard, and for continuing the day in and day out work that you do building the innovation ecosystem. Thank you. So I'm actually going to mute myself and turn off my camera and grab some Kleenex, and then we come back.
Oh, what a cruel virtual world. I wish we could give you a hug. Anyway, we'll leave the room open if anybody wants to chat. It is 1 o'clock. So thanks everybody for coming. Have a great rest of Innovation Week. Check out Startup Calgary site and keep coming to events. It's been a great week so far. Thanks, Startup.
No worries. Hope to see you folks later.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see everybody.
Thanks, Bridget.
Thanks for coming, Jim. Thanks, Brad. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Craig. Thank you. It's like Polka Dot Door or whatever that show was. Thanks to all. Have a great week.